Idris Elba says that whatever he has learned about advocacy is from Michael Sheldrick.
So my name is Michael Sheldrick, co-founder, global citizen, dad, policy entrepreneur, author, speaker, board member, amateur historian. 2019, Chris Martin said, listen, we're not going to tour again unless we can halve our emissions. And fortunately, over many years, they've more than halved. I think they've reduced their emissions from their previous tour by 59%. But young women, if you isolated them from their male counterparts, they would be the most internationalist generation in the history of the world. And we realized that to find the right messenger, we actually went through Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK at the time, and the British ambassador in DC, because we realized that they were the best place. And lo and behold, the Trump administration responded and they made the largest contribution to that campaign. People want agency, they want to make an impact, but they don't know how. And so those brands that can tell those stories of how, I think that's going to connect rather than just talking about the issues, because I think right now people just see that as performative. They want action.
Hello, fellows. Welcome to the next episode of Jagged with Jasravi. Subscribe to my channel for conversations at the edge with thought leaders from the marketing, branding, and the business world. Conversations that ignite new ideas, ideas with rough and sharp edges. Hello, Michael. Great to have you on my show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Do you want to introduce yourself in like a tweet?
So my name is Michael Sheldrick, co-founder, global citizen, dad, policy entrepreneur, author, speaker, board member, amateur historian, and wannabe storyteller. There you go.
I would like our audience to know that Global Citizen is an international education and advocacy organization with a mission to end extreme poverty worldwide by 2030. So everything that we will talk about, all the concerts and the great artists and politicians and all stakeholders and even people who've gotten involved have had this lofty goal at the center of their hearts. So advocacy. What is advocacy? Because, it's a term that is used very loosely in marketing and branding. We want consumers to be advocates. We want, celebrities to be advocates. Influencers have come into the picture. And also, I want audience to know that Idris Elba says that whatever he has learned about advocacy is from Michael Sheldrick. So we are fortunate to learn about it from the man himself. What is advocacy?
Yeah, and Idris and his wife Sabrina, they were very kind to write the foreword to my book, From Ideas to Impact, but they are fantastic advocates in and of themselves, and they talk a little bit about that in the foreword. Look, an advocate, right? The technical definition is someone who's trying to persuade someone in a position of authority, position of power, maybe position of great wealth, to do something. Ideally, do something good, right? Whether that's contributing towards a cause, whether that's giving time, or whether it's passing a law that makes something better. But at its core, being an effective advocate, and this is where we have a great tie-in with your podcast and what you do, is really being a good storyteller. That's it. Like a good advocate, someone who can persuade, is someone who can tell good stories from a place of authenticity, a place of conviction, because I think stories are at their most persuasive when people are transported with you, right, on the journey. And that takes great authenticity. It takes knowing yourself. It takes knowing what you stand for. So an effective advocate is to be a good storyteller. And I think all of us have the ability to be good storytellers.
When you say that brands can create, can help be part of social change or a positive change, that's all that's required, that they be great storytellers? How can they integrate, a cause without it being gimmicky, without it being a marketing differentiator? And every brand cannot be a Patagonia that they have it at the heart of their business model. How do you see them, partnering the cause, for example, the cause that Global Citizen has?
There's probably a number of principles that brands or companies or really any organization right now can use to not just drive change, but resonate with people, with their employees, their stakeholders, their customers, their investors. I think the first thing to recognize is right now, there is this deep yearning for connection, for community. I think people don't just want to try and do something good, they want to do it with others, right? And I see this in companies increasingly saying, I want to find ways to bring my employees together around shared activities. You see this saying like customers saying, I want to be co-creators. I don't just want to be fed information from some purpose-driven brand. I want to be part of it. And if brands can find ways to activate with their customers, then that's going to be enriching. So I think one principle is this idea of community first. How do you nurture that? And how do you respond and satisfy that great yearning that we all seem to have right now for connection? 74%, I think there was a study, More in Common, US, found that 74% of Americans actually are desiring to come together with those they may not agree with on anything, everything, but to do good together. But less than 20% actually have. And so people are looking for brands, organizations to provide them with the opportunity to come together. I think the second principle is transparency and imperfection. In the book, I talk about pragmatic idealism, right? No one is expecting everyone to be perfect. I think people understand, well, most people understand that doing good, like it's two steps forward, one step back. It's often trial and error. But what they want to see and what they want to understand is actually the learnings. I think people respond positively when organizations don't try and sugarcoat everything. An organization that might publish its carbon footprint, be honest about how it's reaching its target, be honest about its shortfalls, and say, this is the learnings. And I think there's a real desire right now for that kind of transparency rather than a sugarcoating. And finally, I think they want to see purpose-driven messages almost and stories, but without preaching. So in the book, I talk about stories of how. And I think right now, rather than just talking about why it's important to do something, a company saying, yeah, we believe in taking action on climate change. I think those brands that will resonate with consumers are those who can actually tell a story around what they do. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It could be learning, it could be trial and error. But this past weekend, I was in Hong Kong, right? And with Coldplay, they were performing there, and Global Citizen's been the chief charity partner of Coldplay for many years. You come along to a Coldplay concert, you can sign up to be a Global Citizen. So I was with these, volunteers, other partners at the show and seeing thousands of people come together. And right at the start of the Coldplay production, they talk about their journey on how they're making their tour more sustainable. So back in 2019, Chris Martin said, listen, we're not going to tour again unless we can halve our emissions. And fortunately, over many years, they've more than halved. I think they've reduced their emissions from their previous tour by 59%. But what's really powerful is at the start of each of their concerts, they play a video and they talk about the steps that they're doing. And like the dance floor, you're generating kinetic energy. On the roof, you've got solar panels, which is providing energy. And they talk about all the measures they're taking. And these sorts of stories, again, none of this is perfect, but those in the audience are like, you're breaking it down. You're showing me how you're solving this. And that's what people desire right now. People want agency. They want to make an impact, but they don't know how. And so those brands that can tell those stories of how, I think that's going to connect rather than just talking about the issues, because I think right now people just see that as performative. They want action.
it's so tough. It's so
Yeah.
tough uh, being this and walking the talk. And first, you're first to have a story, and then first to have those values ingrained in how you go about everything. But this is such a fantastic example. Chris Martin on the stage sharing about how they are reducing emissions, and for audiences who are idolizing them, this is like such a great uh, being such a great role model. If you have any favorite brands in mind who are doing a great job.
At the Coldplay concert, one of their sponsors is DHL, the logistics company. And they have these great adverts where they actually talk about how they're contributing to help Coldplay's concerts become more sustainable. And they tell this story about what they're doing in their commercials. I think all of this is what people are yearning for and what resonates right now. I think obviously other brands out there that's resonating are those that can give people a way to get involved, to give people a way to take action. But by the way, it doesn't just have to be public focused. I think a big part of brands activating is also what they tell their employees, right? You're seeing this real big desire. And so we're fortunate enough to work with companies like Cisco, Bridgewater Associates, the hedge fund. And for them, these companies are not consumer facing, they're more B2B, right? But they have thousands of employees. And I think there it's really important that they provide ways in which their employees can make a difference, a concrete difference. Last year with Bridgewater, it was really exciting. They put a team together to work with Global Citizen to research this entire project, right? The project involved how do you attract the investment needed to contribute to providing 300 million people on the continent of Africa with access to electricity. And this team, they got together, they volunteered their time, they interviewed people, they came up with this report, they got to travel, they got to participate. It was really exciting. And then with that report, they took it to government officials. They ended up getting countries to commit, especially in this environment. This is hard, but something like $100 billion. I mean, this was part of a collective effort towards this plan to help provide 300 million people with access to energy. And I think what was really powerful was the story of that initiative, the story of the volunteers inside the company, what they contributed, the resources that they came up with, and then the impact of that. That was a powerful story to then tell their employees and their other stakeholders what they were doing. So I think there's many brands and many of the consumer brands we already know about, they're out there. But I think what's really exciting is also how companies, the stories they're telling their employees, and more importantly, the opportunities they're giving their employees to participate. And I think that's going to be so important because right now, despite all of the talk about technology taking jobs, etc., there's still a need for good talent, and companies are still competing for that talent. And so I think having a brand that resonates with prospective employees is going to be important, and they see through the fluff. They know if something's authentic or not.
What a wonderful story, Michael. And imagine being part of a company like that who have a story like this in their shared past, and what kind of people they will attract, when they have stories like that. When you talk about story, we are going to get into, because uh, this is your favorite topic as well, advocacy and storytelling. So, Michael, behavioral science says that a story is how the brain remembers facts. So story makes it memorable because story evokes an emotion, and that is what helps us take an action. Because just facts, you're not moved to take an action. I'm very curious. You worked with the who's who of the global, stars. What is it that moves them to want to be part of causes? What are they looking for? Because so many people must be wanting to collaborate with them. So what has been your experience? And you can share with an example. Last time we were talking about online concert, which holds the Guinness Book of World Records for attracting maximum charities and one world. What was it during the COVID times?
Yeah, there was One World Together at Home, and it was curated with Lady Gaga, and it was just after she won the Oscar, the Academy Award for A Star Is Born, if you remember the great movie that came out.
In that movie, yeah.
Early to the pandemic, and it was, I mean, that was a crazy time. I remember sat at home, getting off this call with Lady Gaga and her team saying, okay, we're going to pull this together. There's no content being produced. We're all locked down around the world, but we're going to get all these artists, everyone from Paul McCartney, Coldplay, like all of the biggest artists everywhere around the world. I mean, it's a global production. We're going to pull this together and we're going to broadcast. It ended up being our most broadcast event in a short period of time, countries around the world, 250 million people. And we're going to use this to give companies the chance to get profiled, but they have to contribute to the efforts of the World Health Organization. They have to do something. And so it was this great moment of coming together. But I still remember getting off this call, getting aches, and I literally got COVID in that early few months when it was New York was ground zero. It was March 2020. I mean, it was crazy looking outside, watching the ambulances drive by. We lived near a hospital here in Brooklyn, New York, and it was very tense time. But I think it was also this moment when people were feeling powerless. We kind of felt a responsibility to show people how they could make an impact and to give people back a sense of agency in that time. And that's what Lady Gaga did. And I think what she did in that moment, saying, I want to do something, can Global Citizen help me bring this together, is what many artists want to do. They look out and they see young people, they know we're in this crazy, chaotic time. And look, they can ask their fans and supporters to donate, and companies will ask their employees to donate, and you can match those contributions, and that's all time. That's all fine. But I think what they also recognize is many people are questioning whether their actions can make a difference. You know, we live in this sea of despair right now, this world of apathy, which is crazy because at a time when arguably we have more tools at our disposal to make a difference, virtually every age group, especially below the age of 55, believe that there's nothing that they can do. And I think what many artists are is how can they give their supporters, their fans, a way in which they can contribute, show them how they can make a difference. And I think that's what many are looking for, and not just a cheap performative way, not just say donate here, which is important, not just say talk about this, put this on social media, but generally contribute and build community. I mean, again, it comes back to that. It was funny when people have read the book, and I did not set out at all with this message to relay, but people have said, I read your book From Ideas to Impact, and one of the words that comes up again and again, the spirit that just speaks to them is a sense of community and how we build it. And you know, there's a philosopher, social studies researcher, a guy called Robert Putnam, who wrote a book called Bowling Alone, came out about just over 2 decades ago, and it was recently made into a documentary, which I think is on Netflix in certain parts of the world, but I'm sure people can find it. It's called Join or Die. And his thesis is this. He said, you know, if you look at the ills of society, rise in angst, depression, polarization, disillusionment, all of this, he ties it to a decline in civic engagement. In simple terms, people stopped joining clubs, whether it was the bowling club, whether it was the Rotary Club, whether it was volunteering for the local fire brigade, whatever, they stopped joining clubs. And he flips it and said, if we can just get people participating again, that could have an increase in civic engagement and therefore address these ills, flip apathy into agency, build trust, address polarization, all of this. And of course, we can't turn back the clock, right? Can't go back to the world in the 1950s. We've got phones, we've got all these other distractions in life. But there are ways in which we can still provide or ways to build that community, right? And artists see it. They say culture is one way in which we can do that, but businesses see it as well. And I think that's why, yeah, I was speaking at this conference a few weeks ago by Gadira, which is actually Indian founded organization. Gadira is an incredible business organization. And what they do is they work with heads of HR, workforce development, and they had them all together in the Bay Area and they convened this global volunteering summit. And companies are figuring out at this moment how they can provide opportunities to bring their employees together around something that does good to build that sense of community. And I think that's in the same way that artists are looking for ways to do that, in the same way global citizen is as well. I think that's what many businesses and many brands are looking to do as well. And it's what I try and figure out how we can do in my book, From Ideas to Impact.
Thank you for weaving this so beautifully. And it all comes to creating and sustaining a community. How do you do that? So, um, something that unites them with a cause, because artists definitely do that. They just, even if they themselves are at the center of that passion and love, like you said, there is disconnection, there's isolation, there's apathy. But why is community become the answer to it? Why is it so powerful for catalyzing change?
A friend of mine was telling me last night that it's interesting because of social media, everything we have access to, people actually think they have more friendships than they actually do, in terms of depth of those friendships, right? And I think the strength of a community or neighborhood or society is when people recognize, we're different, we have our differences in opinions, but we can still work together on these other issues. When I was interviewing people for the book, people who had successfully brought about change, brought about impact, there was one common denominator, and they all said, creating change requires you to work, interact, engage with people you don't always like or agree with. And yet, right now, because of access to social media, etc., we are built or conditioned to go into these echo chambers, and we fall into the trap of believing that everyone thinks like us, right? Everyone shares our worldview, which means that when you encounter someone who might disagree with you on one issue, right, rather than that being, okay, that's a point of disagreement, but what do we have in common? It tends to be the point of disagreement that people walk away obsessed about, right? People don't know what to do, and you feel this pressure. People have spoken about this pressure. I call it the purity test in my book, where people feel that if they engage with someone who disagrees with them on this issue and they try and engage with them on another issue, that they're going to be called out, that they're going to be shamed, that they're going to be labeled a traitor by their own tribe, right? And so this tribalism has become a real barrier in many cases to bringing about change. You think about throughout history, all of the big social movements where we've got to, it's all required this way of building bridges. And so the question is, well, okay, how do we overcome that? And why is community such a big part, authentic community, of the answer to that? Because community and civic engagement, getting people together, it forces people to build mutual trust. It forces people to be reciprocal towards one another, right? To say, okay, you've done this for me, I'll do this for you. And it forces people to actually have a better sense of optimism about human nature in general. You know what was interesting? The World Happiness Report recently came out a few weeks ago. They produce it every year. Couple of findings in the World Happiness Report that stood out is, firstly, people are much kinder than most people think they are. So there's simple questions like, do you think if you dropped your wallet, most people will return it? Well, of course, the answer was no, especially in America. The answer was no. That's what they said. No, I don't think they will. Flip side is when they were asked, if someone dropped their wallet and you saw it, would you pick it up and return it to them? A large majority of people said yes. So people are actually more likely to return a wallet, right, than what people thought they were, right? But because we were so cynical, so skeptical, right, that has an impact on our overall how happiness, our well-being, and there's a correlation between your perception that others will do good and your own happiness, right? And so this is where getting to know people community can change that perception. The question is, and this comes back to what you asked, is how do you do that, right? And this is where doing an activity together is so important because getting around the table, doing something, it can be anything. It can be a reading club. I know we met at the Global Pioneer Summit where I was talking about reading books. It could be a book club, it could be anything. But finding a way to do an activity that almost forces you to
Mm.
come together. And again, to quote earlier research that I cited earlier, most people are willing, three-quarters of America, despite our allegedly polarized society, say that they'd be willing to come together around an activity with people who may not share their worldview on everything. And so I think for brands, for artists, for those in popular culture, for groups like Global Citizen, this is really where we can do something magical, where we can break through if we can meet that desire to come together around an activity that does good, brings people together. And in the book, I give lots of different examples, whether it's coal communities in Australia, whether it's grassroots advocates in South Africa working to address period poverty, the fact in their society, some millions of girls lose up to 60 days of school a year because of something as lacking as basic as period products, or whether it's the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, and what she's doing to nurture a movement to help countries like hers on the front lines of climate change. But the overall message from all of us that I've seen again and again is no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. We just have to give them the opportunity to do that something.
Now, there's a lot to unpack. So I'm just going to underline, highlight a few things that you've said. You beautifully explained why community is the answer and how you can go about creating a community. And in that context, this whole volunteering activity in a corporate takes on a larger meaning because it is people coming together and doing something together selflessly, which can become a foundation for ignoring differences eventually. A perception that others don't care or they will not come along. You can break all those barriers if you just do something together. And
Yeah.
actually, behavior is so powerful that it can change perception and belief. Years of beliefs it can just shatter through if there is behavior. So that's a powerful thing you've just said, Michael.
Community, it can help us break down those barriers, come together. It can help us resist the pressures that we often feel from our own side that says, no, don't engage, don't interact, don't even talk to those people who don't 100% agree with you. And then on top of that, right, the way how you get there is by saying, okay, let's get around this activity. Doesn't matter if we all disagree, and then use that as the basis for that trust. Yeah.
Mhm. And I'm just reminded of something, Michael. You must know Brian Grazer, who does these curiosity conversations, a very famous, Hollywood producer. He wrote this book, A Curious Mind, and he said he's been doing this since 30 years. Having a conversation every 2 weeks or with somebody he wants to learn from. And he says that every assumption of mine, every bias, every preconceived notion about a profession, about a tribe, about an ethnicity has been proven wrong. Just like you said, if we talk and if we go beyond that initial preconceived notion, we'd find that we all are motivated by similar things to do good. I'm quoting this. I hope I got this right. This is your quote. A powerful narrative can overcome lack of resources, making celebrity involvement a catalyst. And there's another one. Authenticity is key. Celebrities must align with causes genuinely, and marketers should focus on emotional resonance over mere exposure. So,
Mhm.
if you could elaborate on both.
It's interesting. One of the keys to having a good narrative, right? If you're trying to convince people to come together, is to be very clear in the impact you're trying to create. Have a clear goal. I talk about this in the book. And to do that, simplicity is actually key. We tend to think, okay, let's butter us up, let's make it very complex, like let's use all these big words. But actually, most powerful narratives, if you want to rally people around you, lies in their simplicity. And when you do that, because in driving yourself to communicate something in clear, simple terms, actually forces you to be clear about the impact you're trying to drive. And if you can do that, it makes it so much easier for people to figure out, okay, I understand the destination you're heading towards. I understand the gaps along the way where you need help, and this is where I can plug in. One of the most powerful examples of this, I dedicate a chapter to her in the book, is the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley. And I remember being with her at the UN, all these groups sat around the table and they were doing something that's very common. I call it the shopping list approach, where everyone's like, we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to address this. And they're throwing out all these ideas. And I just remember she puts up her hand. She says, guys, hold on. The minute we ask for everything at once, the game is up. We get to the end by talking in simple, clear terms. That's how we achieve this. And so she had a very clear goal that ultimately mobilized everyone from Billie Eilish to 250,000 citizens to the president of the World Bank around this goal to help provide financial resources for nations like hers that were seeing ever more frequent hurricanes and other natural disasters. But it was because she was such a powerful storyteller, again, powerful advocate, but in very clear, simple stories and narratives.
And she felt for it, the authenticity. And the other thing that you talk about, authenticity.
It's interesting. I was reading something the other day that Obama was asked, because, we tend to look at Obama as a great orator, right? Great speaker, great storyteller. And he was asked, how did you become a good speaker? He said, believe it or not, he's not a naturally gifted speaker. He said in his early years of campaigning, he spoke about the fact that he would give these dry, long, policy wonkish speeches, lots of facts, statistics. It's hard to imagine. And he said, the other thing is people tend to think a good speaker is those who can land a good line, the pithy, the quotable slogan. And that's important. I'm not saying it's not. But he said he was never good at that. He was never good at coming up with the zingy one line, and people focus on that again and again. Often people go into an interview and they try and think they're really smart. They're like, I'm going to land this line. But he said, he figured out that the key for him being a good speaker was more to align around, his overall vision, his overall values, to know himself, to know why he was doing something. And he said that is key. Understand why you were doing something. In his case, why he was running for president or whatever it was. And he said, if you know your why, right, story of why you are doing something, it ultimately doesn't matter if you're the most eloquent speaker in the room. It doesn't matter if you have the perfect words. But just when you say that, right, and you know your why and you're expressing it, there is an authenticity to it that people will connect with and relate to. And he said that is how he became a good speaker. It wasn't much about the wordsmithing per se. It was about the strength, the tone of his conviction, which was rooted in having a clear sense of why he was doing something. And I think the reason why that's important is most people, unless you have freakishly good memories, most people won't remember the content of a conversation, specific words, but they will remember how they feel. That's what they remember. They remember, if I met this individual, how did they leave me feeling at the end? Did they leave me feeling hopeful, empowered? Did they leave me thinking this person was speaking from the heart? That's what they remember. So a thing that I've said again and again on this book tour while I've been speaking to university students and others is don't go into a conversation focused on how to win the debate or how to score points in the argument. Focus on how you want that person feeling at the end of that conversation. And that's what we need to drive towards. And I think that goes part and parcel back to the importance of storytelling. But it sounds obvious, but I think it's a critical way in how you genuinely turn ideas into impact and build support for ideas.
So you're talking from experience, and you've been part of so many campaigns for impact, and at such scale, and dealing with so many different stakeholders. And when you were talking about a leader, talking and knowing their why, and how they want people to feel, I could not draw a parallel for brands. You know how, when we study branding, it's the same, that the brand has to be very clear about their DNA and their own story and their why. And today it's all about, today even every ad is trying to make a consumer feel something. But how consistent they are, and how authentic they are in terms of what value they want the audience to derive out of, not just their words but their actions, their behavior. There's a lot of work to be in that place of authenticity and clarity.
It's not easy and it takes time. Like I think, it's funny. I mean, I'm I like to be generous with my time because when we were starting out, all we had was the power of our idea. And we were dependent on a few early supporters who took the time to hear us out, listen to us, give feedback, give advice, and help contribute in various ways. And so I'd make myself available if people reach out on Instagram, on LinkedIn, or through my newsletter on Substack. I try and respond and spend time with people. But it's interesting. Sometimes I sit down with someone for often up to an hour and hear about the problem, hear about what they're talking about. And I often stop them and say, why are you doing this? And what's the central solution you're driving towards? And I say, you know what? Before you go out pitching, before you go out having a conversation, just spend the time, spend a few hours, sit down and ask yourself fundamentally, why are you doing this? Because if you can't answer that, and again, it doesn't have to be in the most eloquent way, but if you can't answer that, it's going to be very hard for you to talk about anything with conviction. And right now, you talk about Gen Z and all that, they smell if something's authentic or not. And I think until you know that why, right, whatever you're selling, whatever you're pitching, it's going to be hard to do that well. And so take the time, focus, figure that out, figure out your solution, and then go and pitch. It's worth it. And it takes time. It might even require conversations. It might even require, going for a long walk. It's hard work to do that, but it's well worth it. It's definitely well worth it.
Yes.
And in the book, I have some tools, some strategies on how people can identify not just good goals, solutions, but how you can tell stories of why that build trust. And in the same way, brands need it. It's clear on a fundamental level. I mean, I still remember years ago as an advocate meeting the Speaker of the Australian Parliament, right? Madam Speaker, and suffice to say, on many issues, we did not share the same view of the world. And I remember going in, 90% of the challenge is getting in the room with someone who can make a difference to your issue. So I was like, yeah, I'm in there. Started like talking about what I wanted her to do, facts, statistics, the arguments. Like I was trying to persuade her, again, win the argument. And I could see I wasn't winning her. I could see her eyes. I could see she was losing traction. She's like, who are you? Why are you here? Why are you preaching to me? Why should I do anything you ask me to do? So I just paused and I told her my story. So let me just take a step back and tell you why I'm doing this. And I told a story about how, I was bullied at high school. I was bottom of the class. People didn't think I would amount to anything. And then I had this incredible teacher, for whatever reason, decided to take an interest in me, took a shot on me and helped me become number one in the class. And I told her, like, after I graduated school, got into law school, I felt so grateful to that teacher that I felt I wanted to give back and contribute to the extension of opportunity to other places around the world. And I remember she just responded, she looked and she goes, yes. She goes, Michael, you're right. And by the way, children can be cruel, they can be malicious, and all these things. And that's why you need great teachers like what you had to mold them into society and bash them into civilization. And I was like, okay, that maybe wasn't exactly my point, but we connected here, and then she asked me, she goes, okay, so tell me, what do you want me to do? And at the time, I was trying to protect a certain program. Actually, it was a program funding the eradication of polio from budget cuts. And I asked her, I said, listen, I know you're close to the prime minister. I just want you to go in and have a conversation, put this on this radar to protect this program. She goes, oh, okay, I can do that. I can speak to Tony, then prime minister. And of course she did. And we managed to protect that program. And there was various other activities to contribute to that. But I often remember like the switch where we connected, we had this level of trust, even if we didn't necessarily share the same view of the world on every issue.
So connection, the why story, authenticity, and community. These are the keywords that are coming up. We'll get to the framework also. And you just mentioned the Gen Z. There must be cultural differences, but of course, I mean, this is a generation, it's a cultural disruption, like this generation is so different, and rightly so. So they want to be part of the solution. How can they be involved? What have been your learnings and insights about it?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting because global citizen, right? We had 12.5 million citizens around the world. Say about 70% of our movement is aged between 18 and 24. So a lot of our community is Gen Z, fits into this. So in terms of engaging, I think a couple of things. Firstly, we do see this apathy. We see this sense that, the world's not getting better, but also I can't really do anything about it. Can my actions make a difference? So there is a yearning to contribute, and this is where those brands, those organizations that can really show how that can be done and offer a community in order to express oneself and contribute meaningfully. That's why they will have success and engagement because it reaches a real need right now. I would say the second thing we see is, it's interesting, because people talk about Gen Z as if it's, or as you said, it all thinks the same. But one thing that we are seeing is a growing division between young men and young women. And so what I mean by that is whilst all age groups are feeling this sense of apathy, this sense of despair, it plays out in different ways. So what's interesting is young women, if you isolated them from their male counterparts, they would be the most internationalist generation in the history of the world. They believe literally coming together, community, working together is how we address the biggest challenges of our time. Young men, it's different, and it seems to play out in a more individualistic way. They say, you know what, like the way we address this, right? Maybe it is a zero-sum game. They look at issues, and I'm generalizing here, but you see issues like gender equality, action on climate change. Is this coming at my expense? Is this coming at the expense of my opportunity? So we need narratives that can tap into that can fix that can show actually no, taking action on climate change, women's economic empowerment. This lifts all boats up. This lifts society, and this is what's in it for you. This is how you benefit. And so these are the stories, these are the narratives we need to engage right now. And Global Citizen is grappling with how best to do this, like many others organizations around the world. But this is, if we don't address this, we are going to be opening up this huge gender divide that will see this polarization continue, which just a few years ago in 2016, I remember when people were talking about Brexit and these issues. If you remember, people were talking about this in generational terms, and they said, don't worry, this will all work itself out, as one generation takes over from another. But I don't think that's the case. And we have hard work to do with coming up with authentic stories and narratives that people can see themselves in it. They can see how there's a way to make their lives better, and there's a role for them to contribute.
That's very insightful. And who would have thought that this could be another factor that, is polarizing the generation. And so narratives that perhaps give them role models and
Yeah.
narratives that can show them personal relevance, that this will affect you meaningfully if you, because they want action, they respect action, And they're also good collaborators as compared to earlier generations. Would you say that?
I think that's right, and I think that taps into it and shows how that actually does collaboration, partnership, how it isn't a zero-sum game, how we actually do all benefit, and this is how it benefits you. And we need good, not just stories, but credible messengers, those who can tell those stories as well. And I mean, I think it can be done. I mean,
You
this is a
want to share
challenge.
any example?
I mentioned the Mia Motley story because I think it's a great example, and since I already mentioned her, so quick step back, 30,000 foot. Mia Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados. Now you might think, okay, she's a prime minister. This doesn't count because she's got a position of power, but I will just caveat that. Um, as the Prime Minister points out, right, the size of her country's economy, you have to go 360 cities down in America to a little town called Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, to find a town with the same size economy as Barbados, right? So she knows that if she's going to Washington, D.C. to meet with members of Congress, Secretary of State, President, White House, she really has the same level as clout as the mayor of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Good thing is that's why she understands partnerships. That's why she understands the power of leveraging the strengths of others. And she knew, okay, I need to get Gen Z on side with me, right? I need to get Gen Z to tap into my narrative and to form this movement because I need Gen Z to understand whether they're in Barbados, in Africa, in India, or in America or Europe, their fates are intertwined when it comes to the issues of climate change, right? You can't escape from this, and it's in all of our future interests to address this together. And so, the Prime Minister, she'd been to Washington, she'd been to London, hadn't got much from government in terms of their response. So she arrived in Paris. She met with President Macron of France, and she asked him if he would convene this conference to bring together all the biggest banks to make reforms that would make, in the event her country was hit by a hurricane, would make it much easier for her to access immediate relief, right? And she could see arriving in Paris at the time that Macron was deeply unpopular, especially amongst youth. They were frustrated, they were fed up, they were in the streets, cars were burning. And so she said, okay, I'll make a deal. If you host this conference, we get them together. I will tell all the young people, I will give credit where credit's due, and I will tell them that you've been part of this. So that's why she rang us up at Global Citizen. She said, I need your help. Ahead of this conference, I want you to get all these young people involved together. And I was in the room when she picked up the phone to Billie Eilish's mum and said to Billie Eilish's mum, hey, if Billie cares about this, she represents Gen Z, she's part of it. But like this is a global movement. She needs to bring her clout to this issue, join us in Paris. So we did this event. It was in front of the Ice Hotel. It was on a June summer day. It was 2023. And we had 20,000 youth advocates, like crazy. It was amazing. We had everyone from Greta Thunberg in the audience. Like
Oh,
it was incredible, right? And it was this incredible day. So Prime Minister's backstage. She has the new president of the World Bank, RJ Banga, there, ready to stand on stage. She's convinced him to be the first bank to respond and make this call to action. They go up on stage and she's like, okay, I want to keep my word. I want to thank President Macron. So she grabs the microphone on this stage and she says, I want to begin by thanking President Macron for bringing us all together. And by the way, these 20,000 youth advocates and others who were in the crowd, in the lead up, they had taken 250,000 actions asking Macron, RJ Banga to support the Prime Minister's agenda. So they had all raised their voice, they'd all taken action. So it was together. So she was there to thank them also for their action taken as well. And Rihanna, another famous Barbadian, had also tweeted support, rallied behind it, got all of her fans. So this has become a big movement, right? And people were saying thank you, Mia. Like she had become a leader amongst this crowd, very well respected. They saw her as a leader of this climate movement. So she gets up, grabs the microphone, and she goes, I want to begin by thanking President Macron for bringing us all together. Well, amongst this youth community. Talk about power of brand. Some people have strong brands, some don't. They went from cheering to silent. Like the audience went silent. And then suddenly someone at the back yells out, Macron must resign. Macron must resign. And before you knew it, every single person in the audience without singing started chanting, Macron must resign. Macron must resign. And I was back there and you could just hear this big cheer. And I was like, oh dear, what's going to happen? And RJ Banger was probably looking around, being like, well, this is not what I signed up for. I was expecting an applause. And the Prime Minister, just above the noise, she smiles and she says, my friends, you might very well believe that, but let me tell you this. I went to London, I went to New York. No one did anything. So whether you like it or not, that man is the only one who bothered to lift a finger for countries like mine. That is our reality as small island nations on the front lines of the climate crisis. Again, the audience went quiet. Feel people looking around like, yeah, oh, okay, what's going on here? And then suddenly someone starts cheering, and then the whole audience suddenly went cheering and burst out into applause. And RJ Banger, who probably wanted to leave, steps in, grabs the microphone, announces that he's the first bank. All these countries get on board, these institutions. The next 24 hours, I think it results in something like for Barbados alone, if they're hit by a serious hurricane, they could now access something like 700 million US dollars, or the equivalent of 15% of their economy, because of the actions and commitments made as part of that movement, right? And the most special thing about it, you asked me about, power of young people relate into it. Now, of course, you've got these great role models, and someone like Mia Motley, just to be clear, they were not chanting or applauding for Macron in that moment, but they were applauding because Motley had reminded them what they were there to do. She had reminded them that creating change requires working with people you don't always like or agree with. And in the 3 months since then, after that campaign, we made a conscious effort. All those people who had taken those 250,000 actions, calling on World Bank and others to respond to this campaign, we went back to them again and again, telling them, giving them updates, showing them how this was being implemented. And what we saw over that 3 month period amongst all those young people who might have expressed skepticism, will our actions be heard? Will this make a difference? Will this promise actually be converted into real action that will impact people's lives? But what we saw is a measurable difference in terms of people's trust, not trust in institutions or governments, but trust that their actions can make a difference. And when we come together, people will respond, and that this is in all of our collective interest to do it. And that was just one example, and there's many more out there that where we saw apathy turn just a little bit into agency and increase people's trust that actually, hey, there's still a lot of good we can do in the world together.
Like you said, the most powerful thing is that your action can make a difference. You're as an individual, and then together as a community, you can make a difference. There was something around Rihanna tweeted.
In the days of that moment, she reached out on social media and she tweeted both RJ Banger, president of the World Bank, and then Janet Yellen, who was secretary of the US Treasury, because the Treasury is the number one shareholder at the World Bank. But what they did in that moment, what Rihanna did, is she was asking them to stand in solidarity with her fellow Bayesian leader, Mia Motley, and of course, you know,
Yeah,
all of us got
yeah,
involved,
yeah, yeah,
amplified it. Yeah.
yeah. One thing that I really loved in your book, you talked about being a visionary, being a diplomat, and being an implementer, you know. And, and I was thinking, okay, it's so difficult. I mean, of course, I don't know. I mean, you'll elaborate on it. Would there be different people wearing this hat, in a team, or how is it?
So again, the book From Ideas to Impact, just very quickly how I wrote it, it wasn't based necessarily on my experience with Global Citizen. It was rooted in conversations with many incredible change makers who I've had the privilege to work with and meet with. And I tried to distill it into this 8-point plan that anyone can use, whether you're an everyday citizen, a small business owner, cultural icon like Taylor Swift, to drive change at the systemic level in your neighborhoods, cities, nations, and ultimately around the world. And it was in response to the fact that I was getting all these questions on Instagram, LinkedIn, social media from people around the world, high school students, university students, members of Rotary clubs, all asking how they can do this, how they can address this. And so I tried to distill it into these 8 points. Um, just to very briefly go through them. The first is and these sound obvious, right? But when I talk about the first one, know your goal, again, many people focus on the problem. And if you're raising awareness around the problem, we banned this phrase at Global Citizen to raise awareness. You're leading people down a dangerous road of apathy and despair and disillusionment over time. So know your goal. What is that? Global Citizen, it's a world without extreme poverty. And you can break that down even further. Secondly, know your stakeholders and how to influence them. You know, what I often find is people come in and they will conflate messaging. They will say, I'm trying to convince Gen Z over here, and they might use messages that would be useful in like a boardroom with members of Congress, right? Not necessarily going to work. And so I break down with some examples on how to do that and also how to find credible messengers as well. To give an example, you know, several years ago, we were trying to convince the first Trump administration to contribute to vaccine equity efforts, right? During the pandemic, test treatments and vaccines to make it available around the world. And we realized that to find the right messenger, we actually went through Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK at the time, and the British ambassador in DC, because we realized that they were the best place. And lo and behold, the Trump administration responded and they made the largest contribution to that campaign. The third principle is around mastering the art of time, right? Every idea has its moment. And I talk about this concept of the Overton window. The Overton window is really this notion that there are certain policies which are socially acceptable at a moment in time. But the key, if you want something that isn't necessarily acceptable, is how do you shift the Overton window? And I come up, list all sorts of tours, examples of how you can shift the Overton window to make something suddenly acceptable. And some of it is using creative framing devices. Other examples that I use is the power of popular culture itself to make something relevant, to make something cool, and how we talk about and communicate these issues to suddenly make them acceptable to a generation of people where they may not have been before. The fourth principle is mastering the art of storytelling, which includes stories of why, which we've spoken about why that's important to build trust, but also stories of how, which I think are even more important now more than ever. One example I use is this incredible, beautiful Samoan climate activist. She won one of the Global Citizen Prizes a few years ago. And even though Samoa, this small island in the Pacific, is one of those most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, she always leads in her storytelling about what her community is doing to address that at a local level, whether it's planting trees, building houses that live above the water on stilts, whatever. And I asked her why she does this. And she says, because if she can't talk about having hope for her community, how can she expect others to have hope and do something about it? And so she has to talk about how they're already taking action, stories of how so important right now. Okay, so that's the first four, right? And I call that the visionary. If you can do that, have a goal, communicate and know your stakeholders well, master the art of timing, and also master the art of storytelling, that's the visionary, right? The next one we get to the diplomat. First principle here is what I call pragmatic idealism, right? And really what we're talking about here is what I've mentioned in the context of Mia Motley is creating change requires trade-offs. It requires working with people you don't always agree with, and it requires resisting that tribalism. We've spoken about that. the pressure that comes often from our own side to impose a purity test that says, unless we agree with you on everything, we can't engage with you. And, I talk about everything, you're right, history, everything from the Northern Irish peace process through to even when Obama was elected, the fact that, many of the people who supported him, the young people, were those who identified as LGBTQ, right? And Obama at the time didn't believe in marriage equality, but they still came out and supported him because he was pro civil union. So he was pro removing legal barriers for people who love people of the same sex. And they supported him, even though they didn't agree on everything, because they recognized it was a step in the right direction. Too often, we find people today who say, yeah, even if it's a step direction, if you're not giving us everything we want, nah, count me out, right? And it's not how change is generally done. Next principle under the diplomat is those who can build coalitions, leveraging the strengths of others. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. How do you identify your weaknesses and leverage the strengths of others? And generally, sometimes in particularly in the nonprofit world, you meet nonprofits who want to do everything rather than recognize, hey, look, we're an advocacy organization. We know how to communicate. We know how to amplify. Let's partner with these who do programmatic work on the ground really well and create something special. Then we get to the final type, which is the implementer, which sounds very unglamorous, right? It's like people will say, well, I want to be a visionary, I want to be a diplomat. You generally don't meet people who say they want to be an implementer, but this is where you land the plane. This is where you turn talk into action, promises into impact. And the first principle here is accountability. How do you track delivery of commitments? At Global Citizen, we're tracking something like $60 billion worth of commitments on various technologies. And what I often say is, yes, we have these big festivals, concerts, you hear all these big promises being made on stage, but it's the work that happens afterwards to actually track every dollar, make sure it goes to where it needs to, and make sure it actually impacts people's lives. So I talk about some examples. Finally, and by the way, that's also having a good end game, right? And Mia Motley, she really imbues us having a good end game, keeping your eye on the prize. The key attribute here in installing accountability, right, isn't just stamina, it's also tenacity. You got to be tenacious, that attention to detail. Finally, we have sharing stories of success, which again, I've mentioned stories, but the role of the implementer is really to share those stories. Again, you take Coldplay, right? You take after they've had this impact, the video that they put out showing how they did that and breaking down the actual implementation. The reason why that's important is because studies all show that at a time when we don't trust what we're fed through traditional news media, other sources of information, one source of information we do often trust is still from our friends and family. One of the best ways to instill a bias for action in others is when you tell them what you're doing and the impact you're having. It might be I've written to my local mayor and I got a response. And you know what? We didn't have a tree in front of our garden. Well, now they're going to do it. And you know what? People do actually respond to this. Yesterday, I was in this, we were delivering this advocacy workshop, and there was this young woman there. And I don't know if this reached news in India, but recently, Senator Cory Booker, a senator in New Jersey, he broke the record for delivering the longest speech in the Senate. It was a record that hadn't been broken for decades. He spoke for 25 hours, just listing all these concerns, right? But one of the letters he read out was actually from this young woman who was in this advocacy workshop, and she said, I just, so upset with some of the things that was happening that I decided to talk through the impact this was happening and the solution. And I just wrote it to my senator, not expecting anything to happen. She said it was more cathartic process, just getting it out, sending it off, right? Then she suddenly started getting these messages from people saying, you know, Senator Booker is on the floor of the Senate and he's reading out your letter and he's reading it out. And she got all this attention to this issue, media, other people reaching out, LinkedIn, all of this. But what's powerful is yesterday she was in a workshop with 100 other advocates sharing this story. And this is not about being political. It's not saying one side's better than the other, but she was saying if you have a voice, she never thought that it would get national attention, literally in the heart of Washington, D.C. So she was sharing it with more than 100 other people as a story. We can make a difference because we have made a difference, and those stories are important to share, especially if you're already doing something. A few weeks ago, I was speaking to all these engineering students across the country, volunteers, building wells in Guatemala, fixing buildings in Tennessee, in the south of America, you know, building solar panel projects in Sierra Leone. And I said, you're already doing something. You're already literally building something that's having an impact. Share that with others. Share the results of that. It's so understated. And so we've got the visionary, got the diplomat, we've got the implementer. And I will just say, exclusive to you, is I'm working on a fourth special bonus chapter, and you can get a copy by emailing me. You can sign up to my newsletter. You can buy a copy of my book and send me a receipt, whatever. But this fourth chapter is going to be called The Innovator, and it's built on a few things which, since I wrote the book, have come to light, particularly from purpose-driven entrepreneurs who are saying, this is great. This is my story that resonates. Here's a few more principles. And so I'll be building on this. There's more to come. You know, writing this book, it was never meant to be an end in itself. It was meant to be the start of a conversation. So I've got more principles to come, building on these eight.
Good talk. Now we have a rapid fire. Mother's best advice.
This is my grandmother's best advice. You know, she said to my dad, you die if you worry, you die if you don't. So why worry?
Lovely. What would you do on Mars for fun?
I don't know. Try and jump up and down. See what it's like jumping. Imagine what that.
Okay, imagine Michael jumping up and down, everyone. Okay. As per your partner, your most often used phrase.
Oh, trust me. Which is it can sometimes be annoying. I know.
Okay, a book you'd like to gift to all your friends cannot be your own.
I mean, there's so many great books out there, and yeah, Global Pioneering Summit. I mentioned a few like M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled, and a number of others. I would say a book recently that had a profound impact on me, and this is going to sound grim, but it's a book Nuclear War Scenario, because I think if we all read that, we would all put things into perspective and realize how precious life is on Earth, how long it took us to get where we are, and how quickly we can throw it all away.
What's something new happening in your life right now?
Right now, so I've been teaching at Columbia University. Based on the book, actually, I recently took my students to the Amazon in Brazil. And so that's been really cool, trying to figure out with them how they can make a difference. And for me, I'm just sitting back offering advice and trying hard not to get in and run it for them. But that's been really cool, like trying to sit in the background, offer advice, and watch how they figure it out.
What is your favorite childhood memory?
Probably done like, as a kid, I liked history, right? As you can tell. So my parents indulged me. My mum's originally from Britain. My grandma lives. And one memory is driving up with my parents and my sister to visit Hadrian's Wall, or the remains of that, because I was obsessed with Roman history. So that was pretty cool memory.
Okay, what is your greatest joy?
Right now it's probably like, and this might sound cliched, but it's true. But I have a 16-month-old daughter, and it's pretty cool hanging out with her and just seeing right now all of the new things she's learning, which is really cool because she's also teaching me because my wife is Chinese and my parents-in-law are here and speak to her in Chinese. So she now probably knows more Chinese than I do. So when she says words, I'm like, what's she saying? What does that mean? So yeah.
And it's one of the most difficult languages, right? Tiny.
Exactly. Exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
What is one missed opportunity you wish you could have a second chance at?
I wouldn't say one missed opportunity. It's more about one thing I'm trying to figure out is my parents live on the other side of the world in Perth, Western Australia, literally the polar opposite from where I am in New York. And so I'd love to figure out a way in which we could allow them to see their granddaughter a lot more. That's probably one thing. But I'm sure, every missed opportunity is also an opportunity to course correct. So I'm sure we'll figure something out.
Lovely. And what's your jagged edge?
Jagged edge. Ooh. It's funny. Some people said knowing your stakeholder, they said I was doing a call yesterday and I was really angry with this person. And then I was like, okay, I have to get on the phone and figure this out. And then my colleague said, I love how the fact that you're really angry with this person, but then when you got on the phone, you realized that being angry, that's not conducive to anything, and just the switch in your tone to one solution orientated. So I don't know if it's a jaggy edge, maybe it's a softer edge, but yeah, this is me channeling my inner diplomat. I think there's too much angst in the world, and generally when we go into something with a heightened emotion, it's a recipe for disaster. So try and be aware of that.
It is. It is a jagged edge because it's a gift in its raw form. That's a contribution to the world. Okay, so Michael, now how can people reach out to you? And if you want to say something about your book, also how can people associate with Global Citizen if that's on the agenda at all? Because it is, I mean, everybody needs to be a global citizen. Yes.
So with the book, it's available on Amazon, Kindle, Audible. I've been told if you listen to it at 1.6 speed, if that's your thing, you can listen to it in less than 4 hours. So there you go. You can also find it on other stores outlet. It's available at michaelsheldrick.com/book. In terms of how to get in touch with me, you can reach out on LinkedIn, on Instagram. I'm there at Mick Sheldrick. And in addition, you can sign up to my newsletter on Substack, michaelsheldrick.substack.com. I have lots of ways, whether it's upcoming events, things that people can get involved in, actions that people can take. You can also learn more about the bonus chapter, and you can get in touch, subscribe, and learn more about that. And lastly, to become a global citizen, you can download the Global Citizen app or head to globalcitizen.org to learn about the great work Global Citizen does. Well, I appreciate it. We'll encourage everyone to subscribe, promote it, and looking forward to continuing the dialogue. It's been lots of fun.
Yay. Absolutely. It was wonderful to have you, Michael. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you.